All right, we back. We back. All right. So, thank you guys for tuning back in. Last week was our season two's, first episode. This week we're doing our second episode. We're back, and last week we got really new questions from just coming back after like a long period of stopping, and then for really our first episode, then people start asking, so after this New Year's, we have people are getting back into the routine, and then there's things that actually are coming up on training volume, where people are as yourself, you've talked about competing in this coming year, and then we start to engage a little bit more questions on people actually asking, is that, hey, like I've been training, it seems fun, bodybuilding seems something that's actually doable now, compared to a couple of years ago or even 10 years ago, where it's like, oh man, this is like way out of arm's reach. So when, like, it's even for me, when I started lifting, I see those really big dudes, like I was like, man, this is not something I could possibly do. And then now, we're actually competing. We have a lot more platforms, and now we're just, it's still around now that people are started to train, in a very higher volume of training, where it's like a very traditional bodybuilding split, where it's, chest day, back day, arm day, shoulder day. I think it still exists until now. I wouldn't say it's a bad program, but and it still works for some individuals. But after becoming a coach for like since these couple of years, you learn about more training volume, and what's most optimal to build muscle and actually see progression in the shortest time period, and more predictable progressions, to be honest. But as education always is, the more you learn, and then the less you know. I'm pretty sure you've heard of that as well. So what is the most common thing that you see with your clients? The first thing you work with them.
Yeah, so typically when they're coming to me, especially if they've already been lifting weights for like 1 or 2 years and they're trying to like continue progressing, I often find that when I actually have a look at their programming and what they're actually doing in terms of their workouts, they're doing just way too much. Like the amount of like sets and repetitions and stuff they're doing per session is quite ridiculous sometimes. Like I've looked at people's programs and they're doing like 4 to 5 sets on each exercise, and they're doing like five, or not five, they're doing like 8 to 10 like exercises per workouts. A lot of these exercises are pretty much the exact same movement patterns. Like they'll be doing like dumbbell chest press with like like a flat dumbbell chest press with like a flat barbell chest press, and there's just a lot of unnecessary work that they're doing. So like a lot of times too with their training, when I actually have them send me videos of them performing these movements too, they're not pushing it close enough to failure. Like you can tell they probably still have another 5 or 6 repetitions in the tank, but they're more so doing it just to get a bit of a pump, get a little bit of a burn. So yeah, and then in terms of the rest times, I find a lot of people, especially in that first couple of years, is they're just not resting long enough, and that's usually resulting of them not pushing as hard during their sets, so they don't feel like they have to rest as long. So yeah, they're just not training as hard as they probably should be. They're not going close enough to failure. They're not resting enough. They're doing a lot of the exact same movement patterns in the exact same workout. Yeah, overall, they're just not getting the best outcome from it. Like at first, you can pretty much do anything and still get newbie gains from it and still see great progress. But once you start getting into that second, third, fourth year of lifting, you do need to start to optimize things more efficiently. So what I do notice with these people when they're coming to me is they're telling me how they're feeling after their workouts too. So a lot of times they're just getting insane DOMs. Like they're just so freaking sore. They're going into the next sessions feeling sore. Their joints are feeling achy. they're hitting plateaus so quickly, like they're finding themselves not being able to progress as much, and they're just feeling like fucking dead after their workout, and they can have a hard time focusing on work and stuff just because they're just killing themselves. And this is just going to lead to like suboptimal gains because they're not fully recovering from those sessions. They're not going to see as much muscle hypertrophy. So yeah, like it's just like toning back on things is something that I always get them to do at first, and really analyze their form, their intensity, and ensure all of those things are in check. So that's probably the biggest thing that I see with a lot of people that come to me.
Ooh, yeah. So I do see this, and as you just said, man, like I totally relate to that. In the beginning, in our first lifting years, we all the stuff that you said, I've pretty much done. We've pretty much done in the very beginning years where we train like no pain, no gain for 2 straight weeks, and then we're dead for like the third week, and then we come back. So, I mean, it does show, even before until now. I think it's not always the case that like a high volume, always works. But as you say, some people are under training when we're not, efficiently pushing ourselves to the absolute good portion of where muscle gains is absolutely optimal. So, and I guess there's a lot of conversational aspects on what let's per se let's what 2 reps in reserve actually feel like compared to what is actually on paper. So there's actually a lot of different studies out there, but not in that practical way. So I guess as an in-person coach, as you and I has done before, what those actually feel like, we were able to actually compared to, and we also, there's also, lifting experience. So what do you actually have them do with all these suboptimal gains, and when they're actually struggling with all these DOMs and stuff?
Yeah, like again, just to go back to like I was the exact same way when I first started training too, where I was doing this like so much volume and just hitting like chest on one day and just doing a lot of the exact same movement patterns and just getting so much volume and just chasing after that pump rather than really focusing on getting close to failure and knowing what that feels like. But yeah, in terms of like actually getting my clients to see how close they are to failure, like I actually had a challenge in my Facebook community on an RPE challenge to have my clients post up a video of them working out, like one of their working sets, and they have to guesstimate how close they are to failure. I found it was a very fun challenge, and I was able to see like, okay, these people aren't quite training close enough to failure. Need a couple more repetitions, but a really easy way to gauge how far you are from failure is while you're performing that set, go to a complete failure. But before you hit complete failure, like when you think you have 2 repetitions in reserve, say out loud or just say in your head, okay, I got 2 more, and continue going and see if you actually have 2 more or if you have more than that. And I find when you're trying to hit those failure, or just feel that sensation of failure, do it on a movement that you're not going to injure yourself. So if you have like a leg press with like safeties on, like do it with a leg press, do it with like maybe a bicep curl or like a leg curl or leg extension, where if you do hit failure, there's not going to be any negative repercussions from that. So that's one thing that I get them to do is start gauging how far they are to failure. Send me videos of them performing the movements. But yeah, another thing that I'll do with them is they'll get them to rest longer. So with like those compound movements, having them rest between 3 to 5 minutes. If they're somebody that is still a little bit more new to lifting and can't really move as much weight, typically on like that lower end, sometimes even like 2 minutes rest is okay for some of those individuals. But if they're pushing heavy weights, making sure that they're resting it long enough so that they can still get almost the same amount of repetitions on that next set and push really close to failure again. And like what I tell them too, like if you feel like you don't need that rest, the likelihood you're just probably not pushing hard enough with those specific sets. So you got to make sure that you're pushing hard enough so that you actually feel taxed after, that you actually feel like you need that recovery. So that's a big part of it. And then in terms of like the movements too, like I mentioned, like a lot of them are doing like the same movement patterns. Like I've seen people do like 3 different types of lat pull downs where they go one wide, one like slightly like more of like a neutral one, like close grip, and they're doing like 3 sets of each of those. When realistically, you probably only need to do one of those variations and just do 3 hardworking sets of it, rather than trying to have a bunch like 9 sets of like a slightly different variation. So yeah, making it so that there's less overall exercises, but since you know that there's less overall exercise, you're going to put your full effort into it. Because if you know that you still have freaking like 5, 6, 7 more exercises to do, you're probably not like subconsciously, you're not going to push as hard, right? Because you're like, oh, fuck, I still have to do all of this. But if you know you don't have if you only have like 4 or 5 more exercises after, you're going to push it because you know, like, I want to get the most out of this set. So just bringing those sets down. So if they came to me and they were doing like 4 or 5 sets of like dumbbell chest press before, I usually bring it down to like 2 or 3 at first and get them to train really close to failure. And another thing that I forgot to mention before is I do find a lot of people using a lot of different intensity techniques. So like supersets, supersets, drop sets, all these different things, and just having it after like for every single exercise. And I found just you can still utilize some of these intensity techniques, but doing them in a way where it's not every single exercise where you're just fatiguing yourself and halfway through the workout you just can't like move as much weight because you're so fatigued. Like you want to make sure that you can use them, have 1 or 2 in each of your workouts, but if you're having like 5 different intensity techniques in one workout, it's probably not going to go over well. You're probably going to find it more challenging to actually log it in your book, because like logging those kind of intensity techniques can be a little bit more challenging sometimes too. So if we can keep it to more straight sets, I found that, and push to a high level of intensity, it's typically worked better than doing a lot of intensity techniques. But yeah, in terms of like the actual volume too, like with people coming to me, I've seen them doing in terms of muscle groups per week, how many sets they're doing. I've had people come to me doing like 20 to 40 sets per muscle group per week, and I'm like, man, like how can you even like function? Like if you're training to close to failure, like there's no way you can recover. There's no way you can continue pushing like hard at that point. But I also find when I look at people's sets, like a lot of those sets they're doing is more so like a warm-up set because they're not pushing as hard. But yeah, so I've toned it back to like 6 to 20 at most for most people in terms of like maybe a muscle group that they want to work on a bit more. But that's helped a lot in terms of recovery, and they feel like they can continue to progress, because a lot of people too, if you're doing such high volume, the fatigue is just going to be so high week to week that in order to actually increase your weights week to week, it just doesn't happen a lot of times. It starts declining over time. Whereas if we can do less total movements, if we can push it close to failure, get a good overall amount of recovery, you're going to be able to continue slowly progressing over time.
Yeah, that makes so much more sense for a lot of individuals who, who really want to think about, rethink about the chest day, back day volume. I mean, all in all, it works for somebody else. It may or may not work for you, but I think there's a science behind these 35 to 40 sets per muscle group stuff. And I think what we're trying to say here is maybe I'll ask your take on this. You say like 6 to 20 sets per muscle groups around there for in a week, right? So from all in all, what is a really beneficial I'm going to first ask this, what is a really first beneficial state that you can see from these, let's say 20 sets per muscle group over the week, and let's say in 4 weeks, what is like a predictable kind of progression would be? What would that be like?
Yeah, so it's gonna depend on what movement you're doing and kind of what level of experience. Like if you've been lifting like 10 years, if you've been lifting like 2 years. But yeah, you should be able to. I usually like to use double progression. Like a lot of the techniques that I use are from like Team 3D MJ, like from my coach as well. And he's also the one like from listening to a lot of their podcasts has helped me realize that yeah, bringing the volume down is a good idea. And that's where like I've just by implementing it, like I've found in my last competition prep, my volume levels were like quite extreme, like 30-ish sets for some muscle groups. And like I just didn't find I was actually able to push myself. But yeah, in terms of like the progressions, like just being able to like if you have like say you're doing like an incline dumbbell chest press, maybe you're using like say 70 pounds, aiming for 8 to 10 repetitions. That first week, maybe like you might be able to do 8 reps on pretty much all 3 sets, or maybe 8, 8, 7. And then the next week, you'll probably be able to do like maybe 9, 8, 8 or something like that. And then you'll probably be able to slowly work up those repetitions to that high end of that rep range. Once you get there, then the next week you can increase your weight maybe to 85 pounds, or not 85, 75 pounds. So that would be like kind of a realistic progression with that. And then when it comes to like the reps in reserve, like having your first set be about maybe like 3 reps in reserve. So you could possibly have done 3 more if you went to a complete failure. Like if somebody had a gun to your head telling you to go to a complete failure with perfect form, you would have 3 more. And then usually my second set will be about 2 reps in reserve. And then that last set is pretty much just 1 repetition in reserve. And then keeping that intensity throughout that whole week, or throughout from week to week to week. And then towards the end, yeah, the fatigue's going to accumulate quite a bit, and having a deload, toning back on the volume a little bit is just going to reduce that fatigue. So then you can go back into progressing in the future.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And now, we're I think we talking about these, volumes. I think it will solve, majority of people who actually want to achieve muscle hypertrophy, to build muscle as the most efficient way possible. I think we've been speaking in that column for basically the majority of this entire podcast at the moment, where people wanted to talk about bodybuilding in an all natural state, and that type of volume where it's more efficient to actually build muscle. Or this is at least what I think. I could be wrong, but in that sense, maybe not all of the listeners want to do bodybuilding. So let's say, would you say this would relate, or would there be any relationship with other sports? Let's say if some people want to do strength training, like powerlifting, Olympic lifting, other sports aside from bodybuilding, is there a difference, or would that be a good starting point for what level of your athletes?
Yeah, for sure. Like in terms of powerlifting too, that's another sport. Like I find that people that don't have a coach for it, they tend to do a little bit more volume than they should on those like compound movements as well. And I find when people start doing like almost excessive amounts of volume with those compound movements, they can start dealing with like knee, hip issues, lower back issues, just because it's such a taxing movement. So if you can, yeah, still make sure you have a good amount of volume for those compound movements, but maybe instead of having all 5 or 6 sets of for your squat pattern on like a barbell low bar back squat, maybe have like 3 sets of that on like barbell back squat, and then maybe another 2, 3 sets on a leg press to get some volume there. It's a little bit more safer, because that's another thing that I've found. Like in the past, I've even personally done when I was doing like a power building program, whereas I was doing like 10 sets of 3. I think it was like Matt August's 7-5-3 program that I was running, and like the amount of sets I was doing for some of the compound movements, I made some great strength gains, but my joints and my lower back, my hips, my shoulders were just like destroyed after going through that whole program. So being able to be mindful of that fatigue and how your body's actually feeling, I'm sure I would have done a lot better if I would have just maybe had 3 sets of 5 or something, and then having a little bit more accessory work to still get some volume in, but in more of a safer setting.
Yeah. So this really, I would say, I would agree that this is a very sports specific type of, um, volume that, must be carefully put together. So just for all of you out there, if you are planning to do any sort of bodybuilding or natural all natural bodybuilding type of volume, please reach out to any of us. We're been more than happy to help. But if you're powerlifting or any sort of Olympic lifting, where I think it's really smart to find somebody, not just a homie who's done this before or competed before, but these volume can actually, overall, it could really, really affect maybe an upcoming meet or any sort of like that. So look out for yourself. As Brandon has said before, you increase your risk of injury if you're just exposing yourself to massive as well of a volume beyond your body's capabilities on handling that. As you did say, people handle volume very, very differently. It's just based on the person. Not really everything is on by the paper. I think a very good point is just we have a very good predictable week to week progression. I think that's a really good way to sum it up for and in terms of what is enough volume or what is not enough volume for some of them. And of course, I would also say sum it up is that by volume, as you just say, it's not only just by the how much sets you're doing per muscle group. I think you also mentioned there's the RPE or the RIR, the intensity of the workout is actually part of the volume, and it's also part of how many times you're doing it per week. Let's say, as you said, you don't want to be working like 5 different or 3 different lat pull downs in one session. It's just suboptimal. So you wouldn't really plan out your week for these type of all these categories actually fall into when you quote unquote volume as well. I think it's a really good way to sum it up.
Yeah,
is there
I
anything
would
else you
say
want to add?
one more thing is when you
Yeah.
look at the volume from like a compound, like maybe like a barbell back squat or like a conventional deadlift, like the volume from those, like, since those movements are quite taxing just on the full body, the volume from those compared to maybe like a leg press or like a 45-degree hip extension, like there is a little bit of difference in terms of, they would classify as like the stimulus to fatigue ratio. Like you're getting like a large amount of stimulus from like the back squat, but you're also getting a large amount of fatigue. So just understanding that when it comes to your own programming, that you should be understanding, okay, like how am I going to feel if I do like 5 or 6 sets of like barbell back squats at a very heavy weight. So just understanding that not all exercises are created evenly for like volume totals. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but before we close this off, I think what you mentioned back there I think is going to be another really, really productive episode, is when you talk about techniques, a couple of intensity techniques. So things like drop sets that you talked about, things like supersets. I think this is another one of those questions that we actually get a lot often. When to use them, when to utilize them, and when is it beneficial versus when is it suboptimal, as we just mentioned in this episode. But I think we don't have time for that now. I think that's a totally individual thing by itself. But I think it's a very good covered of what volume looks like as a whole. And is there anything else you want to add before we close this out?
No, yeah, that's pretty much everything, man.
That's excellent. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. We are again, we just want to speak to you guys. We are back on Spotify, and now we are actually on YouTube as well. We have this YouTube channel at Lifting Nerds. You can just check us out, and also our new Instagram page at Lifting Nerds as well. If you like, please leave us any comments and any ratings on Spotify. We will look into those, and once we have enough questions or any comments there, we'll definitely share them as a potentially a Q&A session. That'll be really, really cool, I think, in the future. So yeah, we'll that'll be closing it out, and we'll see you guys next week. Peace.